Hafaday, Tiro, and welcome to Marianas Stories, where we feature ordinary people with extraordinary stories in the Marianas. And today we're talking with a lady who's very passionate about learning and sharing about her island history, Deborah Fleming from the island of Tinian. Deborah, thanks for making time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for wanting to hear our story.
Well, I'm excited to hear about how you came to be so passionate about this, but maybe you can start us off with, for somebody who's never heard of Tinian, never been here, how would you describe it?
I want to say that Tinian was an ancient reef that through a very catastrophic volcanic activity and earthquake, it rose from the ocean. And then, it developed with the bird poo and all that. And so it's so lush, but also our location places us right in the path of superstorms. So we do not have any trees that are ancient years old, but our ancient soil nourished them. And the island is very resilient, like its people today.
Absolutely. So we're here at the House of Taga, which is one of my favorite historical sites in the entire Marianas. Would you mind to show us a little bit around while we chat?
Absolutely. This is our pride and joy of the Marianas, the House of Taga. As you can see, they are a 12 lati pillows of the Haligi and the Tasa. And carbon dates them about 4,500 years ago. It still baffles archaeologists. How did they bring them from more than a quarter mile away and to erect them here? There are many theories. However, there were 18 such laddie houses, except smaller scale. These are large because they belong to the house of the chief of all of the Marianas, all the Chamorros in the Marianas. And his name was Taga, which means to Taga. But during the sugarcane era in the early 1900s, a railroad track was supposed to be placed here. That was during the early 1900s. 95% of Tinian Island was raised to grow sugarcane. And to make it easy to bring them to the sugar mill at that side of the island, they wanted to continue the railroad this way. So that is why 11 of the 18 laddie houses were destroyed. There are some remnants of rocks around here that are left. This, however, was saved because equipment that came in here to knock them down mysteriously would not work. Men that came in here to destroy them mysteriously got sick and then died. And that's why this strange looking stone pillar here, if you go up close, you will be able to see that it's in Gothic kanji, but it has been translated, and it asks for forgiveness and grace to the spirits that they tried to destroy these laddie houses, the pillars of the laddie house. There's only one remaining. It has been up ever since it was erected. There were two by 1917 until the great earthquake that dropped the second one. Taga became a Catholic. That information would be in the archives in the Philippines. And this was where the first Catholic wooden cross was placed. Taga had rescued the men who were floating off the west coast of Tinian around at Chulu Beach area, and he sent his crew out to rescue the men. These would be men from the La Señora de la Concepcion, and then they were brought to Guam because Guam was where the Spanish administration was. And so, to give thanks to Taga, he was baptized, and his name was Jose Taga.
So how is it that you became, I would say, really interested in learning your island history, and how did it start? Did your parents used to tell you stories?
Actually, I was so inspired by my grandfather, Joaquin Aldon. He lived in Saipan and Tinian after they moved here from Yap. They repopulated, the Chamorros repopulated Tinian. It's possible to do that when you own your own boat. He was a celestial navigator. He built boats, by falling trees with his sons in Yap when they were living there. They were all born in Yap because they evolved over there from Guam during the German period. And he would build boats for rich Ricazon Natsamoru from Guam and Saipan. And when he came to Tinian in 1947, he purchased himself a wooden boat for $5, and he called it MV Venus. That picture is in the Cinema History Culture in Saipan when they rescued the stragglers in Anatahan after the war. And so he inspired us with a lot of stories about the universe, and about a lot of them were biblical stories. So every time we know that Pa is on island, because my cousins who live closer to the pier would grab their mats and come up to our house and already get it laid down and ready, waiting for Pa to come and tell us more stories.
When I spotted you here this morning for our interview, you had already started sharing what you just shared to a group of people who just happened to stop by, and you're there playing tour guide, which you are a tour guide. Why do you do it? How does it make you feel when you share this with people not from Tinian?
Well, this is not my story. It's a story about the island and its history, and it belongs to everyone. So I'm really passionate about it. We all have a different sense of what development is and how the island should be developed. So if you look that way, I want to say they have the audacity to build that there and cover Goat Island because, I used to be an ancestor worshiper. And then I believed and I learned that this island, because there are laddies on all the islands in the Marianas. There are laddie sites in Aguiguan Island as well. And we learned growing up that this island is so related to that as far as spiritual worship. And, having that modern day structure there, although they decorated it with lattice around the building, it still blocks the South Point, and the Naftan Rock area. So,
speaking of development, Tinian and the rest of the Marianas have also played a role in the military for a lot of other countries through our colonial past. What are your thoughts on that part of our history, and which is still continuing today?
True. In order for everyone in the Marianas to be U.S. passport holders, Tinian was the sacrificial lamb. Eminent domain condemnation of developed lands by local people has never been done to this day. It happened in Tinian. And so that 2/3 of our island could be leased for military defense purposes. And the presentations that were made then through the public hearings were about building a base, building a school, which is what our parents were most interested about, because they themselves and their parents before them for generations were never allowed any education. But they knew that education was the most important thing in order for us to be independent and be self-reliant, And they never did. We eventually grew our own high school. And in 1991, we had our first graduates on our own. Telling you about resilience, and the will to fulfill your needs. So, then recently, in the last 10 years, the military had changed their dialogue, because then they wanted to turn this island into a multi-spectrum bombing range. We didn't want that. That was never part of the agreement. It's a leasehold, and they did prepay it. And why the Commonwealth established Marianas Public Land Trust. That's the seed money for the Commonwealth to develop itself, with a small percentage of it every year would go to the general, coffers, so everybody can benefit. But it was never for a bombing range. And although we're grateful, and I enjoy the ease of having a U.S. passport, I'm concerned about my island because that lease requires them to return it as they found it or better. So what's our definition of better? That's something that we really need to consider and teach our kids. What is better? Because honestly, that's not better. Look at that over there. The audacity. And I think that Tinian in itself is so beautiful. We do not need, high rises. We're the stakeholders. We need people to be more involved in, going to hearings and understanding, so we make the investors understand how we want the island to be for the next generation. It's our say. And the laws support us in that direction, but we need to be involved.
Could you take us a little bit more through this site? And as we go, other than the house of Taga, for somebody who would come to Tinian, what are some of the other sites you might recommend not to miss?
In this particular site, during, thousands of years ago, during Taga's reign, the mighty ruled like in any other place in the world. And the legend, which is throughout Micronesia, there's just a few variation in the story, but basically it all said the same thing, that Taga killed his young son after observing him showing his might at such a young age. His son was playing with his pet crab, and it had gone under the coconut tree and he couldn't get it out, so he uprooted it. And Taga, observing that, felt so threatened that he killed him to preserve his power. His daughter was so forlorn. She loved her little brother, and she went walkabout. They couldn't find her, and by the time they did, she was so weak. And Taga was so sad too, because he really loved his daughter. And so he, in those days, the private quarters are on top of the tasa of the lati, the way they're constructed. So he dug a hole through one of the cups, and he buried her there so that she can be near him. And that rock is this one over here. So if you notice, all these rocks are flat topped, except this that has just enough for her curled body. Yeah, the crevice.
Wow. Is there any other site on Tinian that a visitor definitely should visit, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Well, Tinian has had a history. Of course, the more modern, it would be like World War II Northfield. After the capture of Tinian, the island was started to be developed in an effort to for the Japan bombing ranges because of its proximity. So they built Northfield, which at that time was the largest and busiest airfield in the world. There are 4 runways. They were called Able, Baker, Charlie, and Dog. And B-29s were landing and taking off every 15 seconds, 24/7. And so that was major. And then the island too, Captain J.P. Halloran was given a blank check. He headed the Naval Construction Battalion. He was given a blank check to build roadways that connected the seaport to Northfield. And so he, coming from Manhattan, he thought that from a very rough perspective, Tinian kind of looks like Manhattan Island. So he built the roadways. I lined them like Manhattan and named them the same. So you have Broadway, you have 42nd and Broadway, 42nd and 8th Avenue, which is Times Square. That's Central Park, Riverside Drive. All the major points of Manhattan Island is here as well, in a tropical place with a green jungle rather than a concrete, steel city jungle.
So looking to the future, what are your hopes for yourself as you continue to pursue learning about and teaching other people about Tinian and for the island?
Yeah. For the future, which is already like since yesterday, and why I teach about the story of our island is to instill in them how important it is to be aware and to participate and to have a vision of how you would like to see this island develop, so that, for your children and for the future generation, do you want to maintain it to look like an island and enjoy that? Or do you want it to look like any other place in the world that is overdeveloped? We have data that we can use as to, we have only one aquifer. So those data tell us what its, population maximum that it can sustain, what types of development that it can sustain, as far as, it will tell you how much water do you need to withdraw. How do you prevent it from being, poisoned or polluted? Because a water study also shows that everything that happens on this island, even outside in the ocean, affects that aquifer. So it's actually very fragile, very fragile island. Resilient but fragile, there's such a thing. But it's beautiful. Trade winds like this all year round, except July and August, but we have air conditioning nowadays.
Any final thoughts before we go?
Come and see it. Come and visit. Bring your swimwear and bring your sunblock, because you want to be able to enjoy it every day that you're here. Bring your goggles, because we don't have that on the island. And the food, oh my goodness, we have some of the world's best flavors here. We use a lot of the things that grow on our island, and people are still very friendly and embracing, and I hope that stays. So you will feel so welcome when you come, so you gotta come.
We've been chatting today with Deborah Fleming about her passion for learning and sharing the history and culture of her island of Tinian here in the Marianas. Deborah, I want to borrow from a comment from one of our viewers. He says, "Thank you for your heart, soul, and courage."
Oh,
Thank you for sharing today.
Thank you. I'm glad to.
This has been Marianas Stories. We'll see you next month.